If you're planning to take your very first cruise, you're probably very aware of the fact there's a lot to think about. In this video today, I'm going to share with you 15 things that I believe every first-time cruiser has to think about doing before the cruise. If you just found my channel today for the first time, then I'm Fraser. Welcome to Fraser at Sea. I use my YouTube channel to share my cruise experiences with you, whether that be showing you around the ships, showing you my cabins, showing you the ports, giving you all my tips and advice, and so much more. If you'd like to support my channel, then please do click the thumbs up button on this video, and also click subscribe to join me on so many more cruises going forward. Anyway, let's get started with number one, which is aim to arrive at the port nice and early. Now, I'm not talking about getting to the port 30 minutes or 1 hour before your embarkation time. I'm talking about planning to arrive at the cruise port the day before your cruise is planned to leave. There's a number of reasons for this, but if you're planning to travel quite a long distance, or if you require to take a flight, flights can be pretty unpredictable and pretty unreliable at times, and I cannot think of a more stressful scenario than planning to fly in the day of the cruise and my flight gets cancelled. Some cruise lines, if you miss embarkation day, they'll allow you to, at your own expense, fly to the next port and board the ship there, but the majority of cruise lines will say, sorry, that's embarkation day, we don't embark guests at other ports, therefore, unfortunately, you've missed your cruise. That would be the worst case scenario. Some insurance companies will help you to get some money back, but that in itself is a rarity. So I always plan to spend a day or spend 24 hours exploring the city that cruise is leaving from. Some of these cities are amazing. You could be spending 24 hours in Miami. You could be spending 24 hours in Barcelona, or maybe even Dubai if you're planning to cruise out of or around the Middle East. There are so many cool options that it seems a shame to fly in the morning of your cruise and leave straight away. Take the opportunity of extending your vacation by one extra night minimum and enjoy what that city's got to offer. It's also way less stressful and a lot more relaxing to wake up the morning of your cruise and in some cases look over there and see your cruise ship. You don't have a 5, 6, 7 hour drive or journey to reach the port. All you have to do is hail a taxi, throw your bag in the back, and then you're off to that ship. So yes, number one, aim to arrive at the port a day early. Number two, know what is and isn't included in your cruise fare. It's super important to do this at 2 stages of the cruise process. First of all, before you book the cruise, and secondly, before you board the ship. Let's first of all look at point number one of before you book the cruise. When you're looking at prices of cruises, it can sometimes be very confusing to understand why one cruise line is way more expensive than another one. For example, an example I would give you of where I was caught off guard with what was included was with some of the cruises that I've taken recently on board Virgin Voyages cruise ships. Now, Virgin, when you look at the per person price that comes up on a holiday search engine, they do usually look a lot more expensive than some of the other competitors that they've got in the US cruise market. When you look at what's included in a Virgin cruise though, they actually seem pretty good value. They will include things like soft drinks, they'll include things like Wi-Fi, they'll also include things like fitness classes and so much more, which if you're planning to use these types of things on other cruise ships, you can actually come out more expensive than booking a cruise with the more expensive cruise line in the first place. So it's really important to understand when you're making your booking what is and isn't included so that you can understand what is good value and what you should be avoiding. The second time when it's really important to focus on understanding what is and isn't included is after you've booked the cruise and a few days before you board your ship. If you understand this before you get to the port and before you board the ship, it removes any awkwardness around, I wasn't expecting that to be charged, or, oh, I thought that was included. It's not ideal if you get on your cruise ship and find that you're being charged for things that you thought were included. It can really put a dampener on the first few days of your trip. So just spend a bit of time before you board the ship understanding what is and is not included in your cruise fare. Number 3. If this is your first ever cruise, then it might be worth paying a little bit extra to choose the specific cabin that you're going to cruise in. After spending hundreds of nights at sea, this is something that I don't bother with now, but when you book a cruise, you've got 2 options usually. Option number 1 is that you can pick the exact cabin that you're going to stay in, or option number 2 is you can leave it with the cruise line to assign you whatever cabin is left at the point of a couple of days before the cruise. Now, that can go well sometimes, and in my case, I'm not overly bothered where my cabin is, but it can also go quite badly if you've never taken a cruise before. If you think about motion as an example, if the cruise line randomly assigns you a cabin way at the front of the ship, you'll experience more motion there and that might affect you. But if you were to choose your own cabin, if you book one right in the middle of the ship, in other words, take the image of the ship and book a cabin halfway along, then that is where you should, in theory, experience less motion. Now, I won't go into this in too much detail because I have put together a whole video about all of the things that you should be thinking about if you're planning to book the perfect cruise ship cabin, if there ever is such a thing. You can find the link to that video down in the description of this one, so head over there once you've finished this video and I'll fill you in properly on that. But yes, number 3, it might be worth paying a little bit extra to choose the exact cabin so that you don't get caught out. Number 4, on the topic of motion, think about what you're going to do if you experience motion sickness during your cruise. There are so many things that you can do now to combat motion sickness, whether that be going back to your cabin to have a nap, standing on the open deck in the fresh air, focusing on the horizon. Believe it or not, eating green apples apparently also really helps. You can buy things like sea bands, which are pressure bands that go usually on your wrists and they apply slight pressure onto the pressure point there. You can also buy plasters or band-aids that go on a pressure point behind your ear. You can get over-the-counter medication. You can even go to the medical centre on board for help if you need it and if you experience severe motion sickness. So there are so many things that you can think about doing. I would always advise knowing your battle plan if it's your first ever cruise, and also take some medication with you. For the sake of a few dollars or a few pounds, it's definitely worth having a little travel first aid kit, and in that first aid kit, pop some motion sickness medication. It won't cost much money, but it could really save a lot of time, a lot of stress, and a lot of hassle on your cruise. Number 5, find out if your cruise line has got a mobile app and download it as soon as possible after booking your cruise. There's absolutely nothing stopping you making that booking and downloading the app immediately and logging in using your booking reference. I meet so many cruisers who don't realise that they can download the app in advance and they plan to download it when they get on board the ship. That then means that they're fighting for a Wi-Fi connection or an internet connection with everybody else on that ship. They're also maybe fighting for a cell phone connection against everyone on all of the other ships that are also docked. Cruise ports can be a bit of a nightmare for getting connected properly, so just save yourself the hassle and download the app and log yourself in advance of your cruise. You're probably getting a theme here, and that is that most of my tips are hopefully going to help alleviate stress and anxiety from this whole process, because at the end of the day, you're going on a cruise. It should be really pleasant. It should be fun. It shouldn't have all these other things creating stress. So yes, download the mobile app as early as you can. Have a play around on there, because there could be some things that you could do before you board the ship. Now, don't worry, you do not need to download the app on every single cruise line and on every single cruise ship. Some of them, yes, they have mobile apps, and yes, they probably will enhance your experience while you're on the ship. But don't worry, if you're watching this video and you maybe don't have a smartphone or you don't have a phone that can download an app, there will absolutely be processes in place on that cruise ship where you will still be able to book tables, you'll still be able to order drinks, you'll still be able to book a show at the theatre. Don't worry if you can't download the app, but if you can, make sure you download it as early as possible. Number 6, and this one is really, really important. If you're planning to take a cruise for the first time, you need to understand what you can book early, and if there's anything on that ship that you really want to do, make sure you book it well in advance. Think about things like shore excursions, think about things like dinner reservations, think about things like onboard entertainment and shows. If you're going on a cruise where something is in really, really high demand, it can often sell out months in advance of the cruise actually departing. An example that I would give you is that I took a cruise to Alaska, and when we docked in the port of Skagway, I really wanted to take the train because I had heard it was amazing. I thought, I'll just jump online and I'll book it using the Princess website, which is the cruise line that I was travelling with. Unfortunately, their excursions had sold out before I even went onto the website, and I checked it months before the cruise even left the port. So if there's anything that you're looking at doing and you really, really want to do, make sure you book it in advance, book it online way before you get on the cruise. If you think about dining, don't even think about leaving all of your dining reservations until you get on the ship. In the example of Virgin Voyages, their dining reservations at the point of recording this video open 45 days before the cruise leaves the port. So yes, okay, there will be some tables that will remain open for people who maybe can't book online, for example, but you can imagine the stress and the pressure on that booking system on day one of the cruise when everybody is trying to book tables. Just get ahead, log on in that example 45 days in advance, make your booking, and you're good to go. Next, before you even board the cruise, spend some time at home planning what you want to do on board and plan how you're going to spend your time. This is particularly important if you are taking a cruise on a massive cruise ship because they can be so overwhelming and there are so many things to do on board. When I took a cruise on an Oasis class ship from Royal Caribbean, I was blown away with the number of things that I could do. And had I not sat in advance and looked at ship tours on YouTube and deck plans on their website, I would have really struggled to have gone around and done everything. I really benefited from sitting down in advance and saying, okay, on day one, I'd like to tick off that. On day two, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z, and so on and so forth. On that note, I would always recommend what I would term front-loading your cruise plan. So, in other words, on day one of the cruise, can you tick off a number of things on that ship that you really want to do? Day 2, can you tick off even more? Day 3, try and tick off even more so that by the time you get to day 5, 6 and 7, you've done most of the things that you wanted to do. There are a number of reasons for that. First, most cruisers tend to leave it until later in the cruise, and then they say, we haven't tried that slide yet, or we haven't been to that venue yet. Let's go there now. They arrive and the line is so long. So yes, try and front load it so that you tick off as much as you can, as early as you can in your cruise. The other reason why this is particularly useful is if I give you an example like the Aqua Theatre on Royal Caribbean. I chose to go there on the first night of my cruise, and I was really, really glad that I did. Because a venue like that is very weather dependent, and if you leave it until later in the cruise, the shows often will get cancelled because people are diving from really high platforms, and if the swell is too high or the weather is too rough out at sea, it's simply not safe to operate that venue properly, so they'll often end up delaying or cancelling the show. Now, on my particular cruise, I knew people who had left it until the final night to go to that Aqua Theatre. And on the last night of our cruise, we did have quite rough seas and the show was cancelled, meaning that there was quite a lot of people on that cruise who didn't get to see it. So think really carefully and plan how you're going to spend your time on board, because it's often not sensible to rely on doing it much later in the cruise. Number 8. Check your cruise line's drinks policy to understand if you can or cannot bring any alcohol onto the cruise with you. So many people don't realise that a number of cruise lines do allow you to bring some drinks on board with you. Now, you're not going to be able to bring case after case after case of wine on board to therefore buy nothing when you're on the ship, but generally speaking, cruise lines will allow you to bring, for example, 1 bottle of wine or 1 bottle of champagne per adult travelling on board. That means that if I'm travelling with a friend or as part of a couple, I could have 2 bottles of alcohol in my room. It's important to note that that rule usually doesn't apply to spirits. Any cruise lines that I have seen in the past who have allowed spirits to be brought on board, that rule is generally speaking gone now. It's usually just wine or champagne that cruise lines will let you take. But always make sure you check the specific drinks policy for your cruise line. The other point on this is that if you consume those drinks in your cabin, then that's totally fine. You won't be charged anything. However, if you take your bottles to an onboard restaurant, you'll usually then be charged a corkage fee. One way in which this could really benefit you is if you really enjoy premium wines, you know that you would have to pay a lot for a bottle of that in a restaurant. You could buy it on land, take it on the ship and pay the corkage and save yourself some money. Personally, I just love having a glass of red wine sitting out, ideally on my balcony, before I go for dinner of an evening. I just find it so relaxing. So yes, check the drinks policy and see if you can take anything on board with you. Number 9, if you're planning to take a cruise for the first time, check out my Amazon store. I have got hundreds of items in my Amazon store that should hopefully help to make your cruise even better. I've got things like all of the tech that I use when I travel. I've also got things that you can decorate your cabin with. I've also got cruise ship hacks in there. So, for example, crease releaser. You're not allowed to take an iron on board, but this spray will help to smooth all of your clothes out after a hard day in a suitcase. You've then also got things like magnetic hooks. There's so much on there. You can find the link to my Amazon store down in the description of this video. But yes, number 9, check out my Amazon store and make sure you've got everything you need to have the best cruise yet. Number 10, be careful about what you pack and also how much you pack. You need to do a little bit of homework before the cruise to understand what the weather is going to be like on your port days. Will it be warm weather, sunny weather with minimal chance of rain? Great, in which case you just need to go to your summer wardrobe, get some shorts, t-shirts, hats, swimming costumes, so on and so forth, and get them in the bag. If, however, you're going to places that could be a little bit more unpredictable, for example, Northern Europe or the Mediterranean at certain times of the year, Norway, Alaska, Canada, there's so many parts of the world where you can find one day it'll be beautiful and sunny, the next day it'll be cold and rainy. So you're going to need to think about things like umbrellas, ponchos, waterproof jackets, long trousers, maybe even waterproof trousers. There are so many little things that you need to make sure you think about to get the packing right for your cruise. Looking at quantity, you need to also think about not filling the bag, because there's nothing worse than going on a cruise, arriving at a port of call and wanting to buy a souvenir to remember that port, and then realising that your suitcase is already full and already approaching the weight limit for your airport or for your flight. Therefore, you actually can't buy anything while you're on board. I would find that so annoying. So always make sure that you think about what you're packing, but you also think about how much you're packing to leave yourself a bit of flexibility to bring home some souvenirs or some new clothes. Number 11. When packing, leave any essential day one items in your carry-on bag. When you arrive at the cruise port, you'll be invited to give your checked bag to a porter, and the next time you see that bag will be in your cabin. Now that sometimes will mean that the bag will beat you to your cabin, and it's amazing when that happens. However, that isn't always the case, and sometimes your bag might even arrive at your room after the ship has left the port that day. That means that if you wanted to go for a swim when you got on board after seeing the swimming pool, you wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't have your swimming costume and your swimming clothes in your carry-on bag. You will obviously take that carry-on onto the ship with you. So think about things like swimming costumes, think about sun cream, think about just anything that you might need. I also quite like to pack a relatively casual second outfit in that carry-on bag, just in case my suitcase doesn't make it to the cabin before I go for dinner. That's a worst case scenario, granted, but it's way less stressful. There's that word again, stressful, for me to just have a change of clothes and wear something quite casual to dinner, rather than being at guest services, stressing about the fact that I've got to wear these clothes, which I've been travelling in, to then go and eat that night. So yes, carry on luggage, make sure you plan it and take anything you need for day one in there so that you don't feel pretty disappointed when you can't do things on board. Number 12, you need to be aware of the fact that some things on a cruise ship cost a lot more than they do on land. Before I took my first cruise, I didn't think about this, to be perfectly honest with you, and I was horrified with some of the additional charges on board. And when I first bought a Wi-Fi package, for example, I was then in such a bad mood because I felt as though I was being completely ripped off. Things like Wi-Fi will cost so much more on a cruise ship than what they will on land, and on some cruise ships I've seen it costing about $30 a day. Yes, per day, per device, to be connected to the internet. Now, there are some things that you can do to save a little bit of money on that front. For example, most cruise lines will offer you the ability to save a bit of money by booking things like Wi-Fi in advance of the cruise, and in fact you can sometimes save up to 20% by doing it before you go. You can also look at travel eSIMs, which I will link my preferred provider of, again down in the description of this video. They allow you to be connected to high-speed internet whenever your ship's in port for a way cheaper fee than paying the cruise line. Number 13, if you've never taken a cruise before, you probably won't even know that this exists, but check your cruise line's prohibited item list, just to make sure you're not planning to take anything on your trip that's going to get you into trouble. Some things like travel irons or steamers, they're not permitted on board for a number of reasons, whether that be energy usage or just general health and safety. If everybody has a travel iron, that's a lot of risk on that cruise ship. So generally speaking, most of the cruise lines will have that listed as a prohibited item that you cannot take. Also, things like candles will also be prohibited. And yes, that even includes if you've got a relative on board celebrating a birthday and you really innocently think to take a packet of small candles so that you can put them on top of a cake. You might land yourself in a bit of trouble, and you might also delay your embarkation process because suddenly you've got to go and check candles in with a security official. Generally speaking, a cruise line will confiscate prohibited items and they'll then return them to you at the end of the cruise. But my general advice is check the list, don't get caught out because it's just going to delay your embarkation day. The other one, which sounds a little bit obvious if you do know about drones, but if you are a photography lover and you love to send your drone up in the air to get some really cool shots looking down, then they're also prohibited items. So you're going to have to either check that in when you board the ship, or you'll have it confiscated when it goes through the scanners. Number 14, buy insurance. And oh my goodness, I cannot tell you how strongly I feel about this one. I've travelled with people before who haven't bought insurance, and thankfully nothing's happened to them when we've been away. But if you do fall ill, nobody plans to fall ill at the end of the day. If you do get sick and fall ill on your cruise and you need help from the medical centre, that is going to cost you an absolute fortune, and you won't get that money back if you don't have an insurance policy. Worst case scenario, something happens and you have to be evacuated from that cruise ship using either the lifeboats or using a helicopter. That is going to cost you tens of thousands of pounds or dollars anyway, and if you're insured, they'll take care of that. Now, I always recommend having health insurance, which covers cruises. You have to make sure it does cover a cruise. And it also should cover repatriation, so that if you do fall ill in another country, will your insurance pay to get you home? They are probably, for me anyway, at this stage of my life, the most important things to look for in a travel health policy. But yes, make sure that you buy insurance and don't get stung with astronomical fees if you get sick on your cruise. Number 15, and we're finishing where we started on the topic of being early and the topic of time. Number 15, if you've never taken a cruise before, you need to make sure that you don't miss the ship. First of all, yes, let's make sure we call it a ship and not a boat, but do not miss the ship. So many people nowadays don't realise that that cruise ship is going to leave without you if you go ashore and you're late back. If you're on an organised excursion by the cruise line, fine, the ship will wait. But if it's just you, you've gone to the beach and you've lost track of time, well, you can expect to come back to that cruise port and your lovely cruise ship won't be there waiting to take you to the next place. You have to always make sure that on day one, you get to the ship early, and on every single day of your cruise, when you're in port, make sure you get back early or at the very latest on time. One thing that you have to think about when you cruise is that a cruise ship is moving from country 1 to country 2 to country 3 to country 4. And when you land in new countries, you'll often experience time zone changes exactly the same way as you do when you take a flight and you land in a different time zone. That can mean that when you arrive, if you haven't changed your watch, you could go the entire day thinking that it's actually the completely wrong time, which is already putting you at a very bad disadvantage. When you leave most cruise ships, there will be a clock as you go that says, by the way, this is the time, and then another clock that says, this is the time that you have to be back. I've never seen a cruise where it's really difficult to understand what time you have to be back. So please make sure you just do not miss that ship, because that would be a disaster. That's it. That's 15 things that you need to think about if you're currently planning to take your first cruise. Now, if you've watched this video and you're thinking, oh my goodness, there is so much more to think about than I thought, please don't worry. Cruises are great. They are so much fun, and there's no need for you to be really, really stressed. If you'd like to join me in more videos, then come over to my channel. I've got so much on there where I'll be showing you around the ships, I'll be showing you my ports of call, I'll be showing you my cabins, and giving you so many more tips and advice. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do support my channel by clicking the thumbs up and also the subscribe buttons. And why not come and join me over in this video? Here, I share with you 15 things that you should never, ever do in your cruise ship cabin. Thank you so much for watching this video today, and I'll hopefully see you over there.